On a day when the interim budget is out, we'll have two fine voices taking each other on. Shashi Tharoor versus Jayant Sinha is our big face-off tonight here on the news today. We'll also have other special guests joining us. But first, as always, it's time for the 9 headlines at 9. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman stays away from any big bang announcements in the interim budget, makes no changes in direct or indirect taxes, raises capex spend to 11.1 trillion rupees. Prime Minister claims the budget is for a Viksit Bharat. Opposition calls the government's interim budget lukewarm, even as Nirmala Sitharaman expresses confidence of delivering a full budget in July, a sign that the government believes it will get re-elected in a few months. Over 24 hours on, uncertainty in Jharkhand as the governor keeps new Chief Minister-elect Champai Soren waiting. 43 JMM Congress MLAs announced backing for Champai. JMM-led alliance MLAs flown to Hyderabad now in another version of resort politics. Hemant Soren in one-day judicial custody. ED officials seek 10 days custody, claims Soren knowingly used crime proceedings. Supreme Court to hear his plea challenging arrest tomorrow. Hours after a Varanasi court ordered the unsealing of a Gyanvapi mosque basement, puja performed in the mosque complex. Muslim side appeals to the High Court. Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal to lead protests in Chandigarh over alleged rigging in the mayoral polls. This on the same day as his 5th ED summon in the liquor gate probe tomorrow. Uttarakhand government to get the Uniform Civil Code draft tomorrow. The draft bill will then be presented by the Dhami government in the State Assembly on the 5th of February. Karnataka Deputy Chief Minister D.K. Shivkumar's brother D.K. Suresh triggers a row after calling for a separate country for South India. BJP hits out, claims Congress is practicing divide and rule politics. Tractors line up the streets of Brussels as farmers surround the EU Parliament. Farmers' protests rage across France, Germany, Italy, Poland and Hungary. But first to the breaking news at this hour, 24 hours on, no Chief Minister for Jharkhand. That's right, that's the big story that's coming in at the moment. The Jharkhand governor is yet to invite Champai Soren to form a government. 39 Jharkhand MLAs flown out to Hyderabad. The JMM Congress MLAs are now on board an aircraft to Hyderabad. Champai Soren says the governor will take a decision soon. But clearly the governor is keeping the JMM waiting, which is why the MLAs are being flown to Hyderabad amidst fears that they could be poached. So lots of dramatic developments now taking place at the moment in Jharkhand. Joining us now are our correspondents in different parts. Shreya is in Ranchi, Apurva is in Hyderabad and Preeti Chaudhary is here in New Delhi. First to you, Shreya there in Ranchi. What are you picking up? Why is the governor keeping Hemant Soren, the JMM waiting, Champai Soren waiting? What is the Raj Bhavan there saying the reason for not inviting him to form a government?
Well, Rajdeep, unfortunately, there is no plausible legal explanation behind the delay that the governor is, doing and not giving the time to the JMM and the coalition MLAs, despite them knocking the door at the governor twice right now. They've also released a video with the 43 roll call count so that to give the governor also a sense that they have the numbers needed, despite even giving the letter also to the governor. Now, because that's not taken place, they did not want to take a risk. They have boarded the charter, the two charters in the Ranchi airport. Unfortunately, what has also happened is because of the air visibility not up to the mark, the plane has not been able to leave as of now to Hyderabad, but they are still parked in these two planes in Ranchi. But so far, the governor hasn't given any clarity. We do not still know what the plausible reason is.
You're saying that there is no plausible reason. Preeti Chaudhary, what could be the plausible reason? It's 24 hours now. The JMM is claiming they've got the signatures of all their MLAs, so it's not as if the JMM has broken as of now for the governor to believe there's uncertainty. What is the plausible reason and what are constitutional experts saying?
Well, Rajdeep, let me first just tell you what was the reason given to the delegation which headed into the governor's residence this evening. Champai Soren was, of course, heading that delegation, and it had one member each from the coalition, that is the JMM-led coalition in the state of Jharkhand, which is the Congress, RJD, the left, and and there were 4 independents. But having said that, the reason that the governor gave Champai Soren was that this is unprecedented. It's never really happened before, where a sitting chief minister has been arrested and he needs to seek legal opinion on how best to tackle the situation, and that is why he needs more time. This is what officially the governor has informed Champai Soren, where he met him this evening, finally after 22 hours at about 5:30 p.m. Now, what are constitutional experts saying in this, Rajdeep, is that this is a constitutional crisis that has been created by the governor in the state of Jharkhand. Primarily, the reason why, because as per protocol, when Hemant Soren stepped down and resigned as chief minister, he's in jail right now. Either the governor at that point of time would have made public that Hemant Soren, even though in jail, continues to remain as a caretaker chief minister till the time a new chief minister and a new government is sworn in. He never did that. So now Hemant Soren is in jail. He has stepped down. The governor hasn't called Champai Soren, who clearly has the numbers in terms of that video and the signatures of the 43 signatures that he took to the governor. He hasn't called him into a stake claim and form government, and not announced president's rule either. So what the state of Jharkhand is in a state of flux, which is a constitutional crisis, Rajdeep.
The constitutional crisis being sparked off, as you said, first time a sitting chief minister being arrested in this manner by the ED, the governor apparently checking to see what are the procedures to be followed. Apurva, you're there in Hyderabad, where many of the MLAs are reportedly arriving. These include not just JMM, but Congress MLAs. There has been a question whether all the MLAs are intact. What are you gathering? Are all the MLAs together of Jharkhand Mukti Morcha, or could there be some MLAs who've gone missing?
Well, Rajdeep, we do know right now that for over 35 MLAs there who have boarded the plane, and in fact we are getting to know that they're all set to arrive in Hyderabad Begumpet Airport, where I am at shortly. In fact, this is the airport, and as you can see, security has been beefed up out here just as we are awaiting for the flight to take off from Ranchi Airport and arrive here in Begumpet here in Hyderabad. We're also getting to learn that most likely there are 3 places that have the Congress-led government here has narrowed down, where likely in either of these in one of these 3 resorts there's going to be these MLAs who are going to be put up at, and all of these 3 places are at 3 different parts of the city. Interestingly, one is right near this airport, whereas there's another airport there at Shamshabad, where there's yet another resort there where likely bookings are being made. So we're seeing 3 different resorts names that are being given out. In fact, the Congress government here, Revanth Reddy, the chief minister, has said that sources according to us do state that there's been all arrangements that are being made to ensure that all of these MLAs who are arriving here from Ranchi, from Jharkhand, are going to be taken care of well, and that all necessary arrangements have been made. So it's only about to be a couple of hours before we're getting to know if the MLAs are going to reach here and where they are going to be put up at. So all preparations from the Congress government here, that's already underway. We're already seeing that there's been an appointment that had been given.
Okay, so Apurva, they're claiming that all arrangements are being made for these MLAs in Hyderabad. Remember, Hyderabad is Congress ruled, one of 3 Congress ruled states, and there's a JMM Congress government, so they seem to believe they are safe in Hyderabad. So this is resort politics all over again, this time in Jharkhand. I want to go to Mahua Maji. She is the JMM MP of the Rajya Sabha. Mahua Maji, ये बताइए, आपके MLA सब हैदराबाद चले गए हैं. इससे सवाल उठता है, क्या आपको कहीं डर है कि आपके JMM MLAs एकजुट रहेंगे या बीजेपी में जा सकते हैं, जो अन्य राज्यों में हुआ है? अभी तक गवर्नर ने चंपाई सोरेन को बुलाया भी नहीं है. किस तरह से आप देख रही जो हो रहा है अभी? How are you seeing it?
देखिए, सबसे पहली बात कि हमारी पार्टी में पूरी एकजुटता है, गठबंधन की सरकार है. बार बार सभी लोगों ने माननीय मुख्यमंत्री जी के साथ एकजुटता दिखाई है. आपने देखा होगा कि कल जब माननीय मुख्यमंत्री हेमंत सोरेन जी ने इस्तीफा दिया, और उस समय तुरंत उनको सभी एमएलएज का साइन किया हुआ, उसमें 43 एमएलए वहां सशरीर उपस्थित थे। वो सभी गए 3 बस में भरकर गवर्नर हाउस, और 5 प्रतिनिधि एमएलए, जिनमें से एक माननीय चंपई सोरेन जी थे जो विधायक दल के नेता चुने गए, और उनके साथ 5 अलग अलग पार्टीज के एमएलए भी थे जिन्होंने वहां समर्थन दिया और समर्थन पत्र जमा किया। उन्होंने दावेदारी की अपने सरकार बनाने की। इसके बाद आज 22 घंटे गुजर जाने के बाद जब टाइम भी मिला 5:30 बजे का, उस समय भी वो 5 प्रतिनिधि मंडल ही गए, पांचों मिलकर। उस समय भी सभी एमएलए को वहां जाने के लिए परमिशन नहीं मिला, तो वो लोग वेट कर रहे थे और इस उम्मीद में थे कि अभी सरकार का गठन हो जाएगा, हमारे नए मुख्यमंत्री चुने जाएंगे, क्योंकि हमारा राज्य अभी अनाथ है, यहाँ कोई भी सरकार नहीं है। इसके बावजूद क्यों नहीं आखिर मुख्यमंत्री का शपथ ग्रहण हुआ या नियुक्त किया गया, जबकि बगल के बिहार में कितने मिनटों में या कितने घंटों में आपने देखा ही होगा कि तुरंत वहां पर शपथ ग्रहण समारोह हो गया। तो ऐसा क्यों?
मैडम
एक ही देश में इतना भेदभाव क्यों?
मैम ये सवाल उठता है कि अगर आपके साथ, इफ यू आर कॉन्फिडेंट ऑफ ऑल योर एमएलएस होल्डिंग टुगेदर, व्हाई आर यू फ्लाइंग देम ऑफ टू हैदराबाद? क्या जरूरत पड़ी है? अगर सब एमएलए चंपाई सोरेन के पीछे है, वेरी फैक्ट यू आर फ्लाइंग देम टू हैदराबाद जहां कांग्रेस का राज्य है, आपको कहीं डर है कि ये एमएलए एक साथ रहेंगे या नहीं? तो फिर ये रिसोर्ट में भेजने की क्या जरूरत है?
मैं आपको बता दूं कि जिस समय गवर्नर हाउस में आज 5:30 बजे वो लोग गए थे ना, उस समय सभी एमएलए की तस्वीर वीडियो जारी की गई थी, वही खड़े होकर, मैं भी वही थी, मेरे सामने ही उनकी रिकॉर्डिंग हुई, वीडियो बनाए गए, सारे एमएलए खड़े थे कि अगर माननीय गवर्नर उन्हें भी बुलाएंगे तो वो भी तुरंत 5 मिनट में वहां पहुंच जाएंगे। और वो वीडियो लेकर वो गवर्नर हाउस में गए, क्योंकि सबको जाने का परमिशन वहां नहीं था। 5 लोग गए, 5 लोगों ने वो वीडियो भी दिखाया और आग्रह किया, अनुरोध किया कि भाई अब शपथ दिलवा दीजिए। लेकिन ये कौन सी ऐसी मजबूरी है कि एक लोकतांत्रिक देश में संविधान के हिसाब से नहीं चला जा रहा है, और बगल के राज्य में जो कि 1-1.5 हफ्ता पहले बिहार में तुरंत शपथ ग्रहण करवा दिया गया था, जब मेजोरिटी है, सभी विधायक कह रहे हैं, वीडियो जारी हो रहा है, उनके द्वार में जाके वो खड़े हैं, उन्हें बाहर फिर से वापस कर दिया जा रहा है। आखिर ये हो क्या रहा है, ये किसी को समझ में नहीं आ रहा है।
As you are saying, Maua Maji, for our English viewers to translate, she's saying that in Bihar, Nitish Kumar is sworn in right away. Here, the chief minister or the chief minister-elect has gone, shown a video. He's got the support of all the MLAs. He's got their signatures. Why has he not been invited still by the governor? Are there different rules for Bihar and for Jharkhand? This question will continue to boil. Remember, Hemant Soren is appealing to the Supreme Court now, and his appeal will come there tomorrow. Maua Maji, thank you very much for joining me. Let me turn from there to our other big story today, the budget. That's right, interim budget for 2024 ahead of the general elections was revealed by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. Here are the main highlights. No changes have been made in income tax. In fact, the tax structure is completely untouched, as an interim budget usually does. Outstanding disputed tax demands up to rupees 25,000 have been withdrawn. The government says it's committed to building 2 crore houses under the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana over 5 years. The capex outlay has been hiked 11.1% to 11.11 lakh crores. 2,05,250,000 crores have been set aside for the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana. Manrega allocation has been hiked by 43.3% to 86,000 crores. Vaccination of 9 to 14-year-old girls for cervical cancer. Fiscal deficit for 24-25 kept at 5.1% is what the government is committing itself to. Listen in to the finance minister and responses to her.
It is now appropriate to look at where we were then till 2014 and where we are now, only for the purpose of drawing lessons from the mismanagement of those years. The government will lay a white paper on table of the House. The exemplary track record of governance, development and performance, effective delivery and Jan Kalyan has given the government trust, confidence and blessings of the people to realize whatever it takes the goal of Vikasit Bharat with good intentions, true dedication, and hard work in the coming years and decades.
मेरे प्यारे देशवासियों, आज का ये बजट इंटरिम बजट तो है ही, लेकिन ये बजट इंक्लूसिव और इनोवेटिव बजट है। इस बजट में कंटिन्यूटी का कॉन्फिडेंस है। ये बजट विकसित भारत के 4 स्तंभ युवा, गरीब, महिला और किसान सभी को एम्पावर करेगा। निर्मला जी का ये बजट देश के भविष्य के निर्माण का बजट है। इस बजट में 2047 के विकसित भारत की नींव को मजबूत करने की गारंटी है। मैं निर्मला जी और उनकी टीम को बहुत बहुत बधाई देता हूं।
शिक्षा के तरफ भी आपने ध्यान नहीं दिया, किसानों के तरफ ध्यान नहीं दिया, गरीबों के तरफ ध्यान नहीं दिया, मिडिल क्लास के तरफ भी आपने ध्यान नहीं दिया। सिर्फ आप अपने रंगीले भाषण को आप बोलते रहे। SC ST बैकवर्ड्स के लिए हम कुछ करेंगे, हम ये कर रहे हैं, वो अरे है सो उनका बजट रिलीज नहीं हो रहा है, उसकी स्कॉलरशिप रिलीज नहीं हो रही है कि ये बजट में कुछ भी नहीं है। और इसके हर क्षेत्र में गिरावट आई है, रक्षा क्षेत्र में भी गिरावट है।
So the 2024 interim budget, the final budget of the Narendra Modi's second term, has essentially been a report card looking back to the last 10 years, which is why we want to raise the big question. Who's done a better job of handling the economy? The Modi government or the Manmohan Singh government? 10 years each. And my first question is, who did a better job in pushing growth? Joining us on this debate are Dr. Shashi Tharoor of the Congress and Jayant Sinha of the Bharatiya Janata Party. Appreciate both of you joining us. I will put up numbers, gentlemen, each time, and you can respond to those because we are looking at a report card comparing two governments, both having done 10 years each. 21st on growth rate, 2004 to 14, UPA 6.82%, 2014 to 24, NDA 5.84%. Jayant Sinha, you want to respond to that? Would you say that when it comes to growth, can the UPA claim that in their 10 years, growth was on an average basis better than it was during the last 10 NDA years? Or is that an unfair comparison given that there were 2 years marked by COVID?
It's a thoroughly unfair comparison, Rajdeep, for 3 reasons. First, the UPA inherited an economy in very good health, growing at 8%. And then, of course, they trashed the economy going forward and they left the economy growing at less than 5% with inflation raging at 10%. So, number one, they trashed the economy on their watch. Number two, they didn't have to deal with a once-in-a-century pandemic, which is what we had to deal with COVID. And number three, the kinds of problems that they left us with, which is when we inherited the government in 2014, were very chronic, difficult structural problems that we had to resolve, which we resolved. And in fact, if you look at our record, as I said, we inherited an economy in the ditch, growing at less than 5%. We have made it the fastest growing economy in the world right now. It was a fragile 5 economy on the UPA's watch. It is a top 5 economy now, headed towards number 3 in the world. And if you really look at the underlying health of the economy, the structural factors that really determine whether we can sustain this growth, which is what were tragically damaged during the time of the UPA, each of those underlying parameters is very, very strong. If you look at capex numbers, if you look at job creation, if you look at investments in the private sector, all of these are looking very, very positive. And I'll make one last point, Rajdeep. we are delivering better than 7% growth in a global economy that's growing slower than it has ever before. If we had the kind of tailwinds that the UPA enjoyed, we would be growing not just at 7%, we'd probably be growing at 9 or 10% right now. So that's what we have delivered, and that's why you saw the confidence today when we said that this is a Viksit Bharat ka budget. We are setting the framework for Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji's third term.
Shashi Tharoor, your response to what you just heard.
First of all, Rajdeep, your absolute number gives you the answer to begin with, that the UPA government did much better. But if you look at the current second term of the NDA, their average growth rate is a modest annual 3.5%. Now, yes, you can give them an excuse of COVID, but the fact is that India's post-COVID growth rate has been lower than that in Bangladesh, in Vietnam, and even in China, which has been going through a terrible series of economic setbacks. So let's not sit here celebrating growth figures. What's even more worrying to me is not just that the question of absolute growth, it's who's benefiting from that growth. Because if you look at figures, I mean, Jayant rattled off a whole series of categories. I'll try and address some of them. If you look at incomes, where particularly the bottom of the pyramid, the annual growth rate of real rural wages has become negative for the first time in the last 4 years of NDA. Whereas, in fact, the first term, they had a very modest increase, much lower than the increase in rural wages during the Manmohan Singh government, which was averaging over 7%. They managed 3% in their first term, and now they've got a negative growth. Real rural wages in agriculture minus 0.6% in the last 4 years, non-agriculture wages minus 1.4%. There was a survey by Reuters this month, January 2024, in which the Indian population says 85% say they've had no increase. 44% say that their salaries have gone down, they're earning less than pre-pandemic. 41% say they've got the same, nothing better. Only 15% of Indians have reported an increase in their incomes in the second term. The poorest 20% of households in our country saw income levels shrink 52% since 2016, since before demonetization. And
but are you willing to accept, Dr. Tharoor, the premise that the government has, that they inherited an economy which they said was within the fragile 5 economies of the world? Today, India is the 5th largest economy in the world. So the government, the Modi government, is saying we've achieved a turnaround in the last 10 years.
As economists will tell you, given the growth in our population, growth into becoming the 5th and now soon the 3rd and maybe one day even the 2nd largest economy is inevitable as a function of your size of a population generating some sort of economic activity. What I'm concerned about is where that's coming from. From 2016 to 2021 in India, the top 20% of our population have seen almost a 40% rise in their income growth, whereas the bottom 60% has seen a negative income growth. This is the real problem. The government says improbably that they pull 25 crore people out of multidimensional poverty, but yet 80 crore people are receiving free food grains, which doesn't exactly suggest that people have stopped being poor. We are also looking at a government whose figures, sadly, have become totally unreliable, Rajdeep. One of the sad things about this government is that India used to be respected worldwide for the reliability of its statistics. Now those statistics coming out of Niti Aayog and of the government are not being trusted. Consumption expenditure surveys were not even done for 8 years, from 2014 to 2022. And this National Multidimensional Poverty Index rests on highly dubious and debatable assumptions. So there's a real worry. Let me say on the comparison with UPA, since you wanted me to address that particularly, 27.1 crore Indians were lifted out of poverty according to UNDP between 2005 and 2014. And they said that the poorest 40% in India had the greatest relative development during this period, whereas under the BJP, if you turn to World Bank figures, 230 million Indians slipped into poverty during the pandemic. Nearly 80% of the total number of people in the world who slipped into poverty in 2020 were those in India.
Can I just get Jayant Sinha to respond? Because, Mr. Sinha, while COVID, particularly in the second term of the Modi government, did affect the economy, especially growth rates, the fact is post-demonetization, and we're talking from the first quarter of 2017, there was a slowing down, in fact, across 9 consecutive quarters. Have there been missed opportunities in the last 10 years, which today the finance minister perhaps glossed over? Or do you see it as macroeconomic stability and the possibility of growing faster in the years to come?
So, Rajdeep, let me pick up on 3 points that Shashiji made. The first point that he made, and I think he needs to check his numbers, is when he said that China is growing faster than India. I don't believe that is correct, and he quoted some other countries. I think he should look very carefully at the numbers, because the reality is that India is the fastest growing large economy in the world.
Right.
So I'm not sure whether those numbers are correct. So that's point number one. Point number two, about real rural wages. Again, I'm not sure exactly what is the best way to look at rural prosperity. I would suggest that the better way to look at it is rural consumption plus transfers. And that's a very important distinction, because we have major fiscal transfers going into the rural economy that may not show up in wages, but will show up in consumption and will show up in overall prosperity. And these transfers include the money that go through the Kisan Samman Nidhi, which is 6,000 rupees a month. It's the money that goes through Narega as well. So we have to look at all of these transfers and then do a before and after comparison to see whether the rural economy is doing well. I can only offer my anecdotal observation from Jharkhand, which is one of the poorest states in India, and I can certainly tell you that our rural economy 10 years later is flourishing compared to where it was 10 years before. And this is with a JMM Congress government that is notoriously corrupt and incompetent. So even then, because of all that we have been able to accomplish in the economy, I think when you look at actual prosperity, rural prosperity, you'll find that it has genuinely gone up. And in fact, there's another statistic which says that if you look across India, real incomes have gone up by 50%. So yes, we can play around with the numbers, but again, if you go and you ask people, they'll tell you that their lived experience has demonstrated a very significant improvement over the last decade. And then let me pick up a third point that Shashiji brought up, which is to say that we have not grown fast over the last 5 years. That is entirely because of COVID, because we actually had minus 7% GDP growth during the COVID year and another slowdown the year after. That's a huge hit to take. And obviously, because we took that hit in the last 5 years, the last 5 years of growth is low. But when you look at it over the last 10 years, it evens out quite a bit and we can take COVID out. Again, this was a once in a century pandemic, which is unprecedented. The global financial crisis, which is what the UPA had to deal with in 2007 and 8, was a once a decade crisis. This was a once in a century crisis, and almost everyone has praised the way India handled it at a macroeconomic level. So I think our economic management has been absolutely outstanding.
You know, it's interesting that when you have two fine minds, they can cherry pick the numbers that suit them. As I said, from 2017 to 20 also there was a slowdown. This was pre-pandemic. But let's look at the next question on handling of the economy. Who has handled inflation better? And if I look at that, clearly from 2004 to 14, it was an average of 8.1%. This is consumer inflation. 2014 to 23 under NDA, it came down substantially, 5.7%. Now, here you could argue that the NDA had favorable tailwinds, especially with oil prices coming down. But Shashi Tharoor, often the UPA or the opposition has criticized this government for rising prices for inflation. But one of the real achievements, many would say, of the Modi government is that they've never allowed inflation to go out of hand, unlike what happened after the global financial crisis when inflation entered double digits during UPA 2 in particular.
Okay, first, Rajdeep, since you gave Jayant a chance to respond to me, but not me a chance to respond to Jayant, let me just stress. I did check the numbers. They're accurate. Over the last 5 years, indeed, our growth rate is only 3.5% cumulatively. And all the other countries I mentioned also had COVID. We're not the only country in the world to experience COVID. Once in a century pandemic, they all were hit by it. They've done better than us. So let's understand that we shouldn't be patting ourselves too much on the back. That was on that particular issue. But coming to inflation, the fact is that our retail inflation, measured by the CPI, rose to 7.44% in July of 2023. And there's a survey by Kantar this month which says that 57% of Indians are worried about rising prices, which is a significant increase from 27% last year. Why are people worried? Go and take a look at the wholesale markets. In December 2023, you're talking about 5%, 6% inflation. Do you know that the wholesale markets in December 23 were 19.6% higher when it comes to food items like pulses compared to the same month the previous year? Paddy was 10.5% higher, milk is 7% higher, and vegetables in December 23 were 26.3% higher than in December 22. What does this mean? It means that for the Aam Aadmi to go to the market, he cannot afford to buy, or she cannot afford to buy, the same vegetables and pulses and doodh that she was buying for her family 1 year ago with the same amount of money. And the problem is her income hasn't gone up. Incomes have not gone up across the country. That's why this talk about inflation and GDP and per capita income is completely illusory when you look at the real experience of ordinary people in India today.
Jayant Sinha, your response to what you've just heard. As I said, I've looked at a 10-year horizon, Dr. Tharoor. So therefore, over 10 years, clearly the numbers here of the NDA are much better than the UPA. You're looking presumably at what's happened in the last 12 months, but Mr. Sinha, respond.
So Shashiji, of course, as you said earlier, Rajdeep, is very eloquently cherry-picking data because, as he himself said, the lived experience is consumer price inflation. It's not wholesale price inflation. If you see that wholesale prices are going up, then there are a whole host of measures which, in fact, our government has utilized to keep consumer inflation in check by releasing stocks, by controlling prices, by importing food grains and other food items. So by all of those ways, we have managed to keep consumer inflation much lower. And in fact, if you find that one sort of set of goods and services are going up in prices, you have to look at a composite basket. And there, you know, for instance, if you look at oil prices, petrol prices, you look at other prices that constitute the consumption basket, there are many things you can do to make sure that your overall consumption basket price does not increase as much, which is effectively what the data is telling you. So yes, you can pick December WPI and cherry pick that data and say it's at 20%, but you have to look at the overall impact on individuals. But let me come back to a very important point that Shashiji is bringing up, and that is to ask ourselves, how is the median person doing? Right? And you know, you can talk about this data or that data. Ultimately, you have to ask, you know, what are people's sentiments? Are they satisfied with the government in its overall economic management and its overall policies? And the best and statistically the most accurate way to look at that is to actually look and see what voters are doing. And voters have just, you know, been very, very much in support of the NDA government and have rejected UPA governments. So that is a composite sense of people's sentiment in terms of whether they're feeling like the government is delivering for them or not, whether the performance of the government is acceptable or not. So to my mind, that is the ultimate litmus test.
You know, I want to therefore put two questions together. Who did better in poverty alleviation and who's done better when it comes to job creation? These are contentious issues. We can throw various numbers. One number recently in an article by economist Ashok Gulati quoting ILO was 2004 to 14 UPA times 8.4% unemployment, 2014 to 24 7.9%. When I look at labor force participation rate, clearly there are concerns, especially among women labor participation. Yes, it's come up a bit because you're also including unpaid labor as employment, but given that and given poverty alleviation, where between 2014 and 2005-6 to 2015-16, 27.1 crore people were lifted out of poverty. This is based on multi-dimensional poverty, source being UNDP. Source of Niti Aayog saying 2015-16 to 2019-21, 24.8 crore people were lifted out of poverty. So, I just want to understand from both of you, starting with you, Mr. Tharoor. Again, this is an issue that the opposition raises, that that the government hasn't created enough jobs. The government hits back and says, look, we've done reasonably well. Look at our EPFO data. Look at the fact that many more people have registered for jobs, suggesting that it isn't as grim as you make it out to be. And here you've got Jayant Sinha saying, if it was so grim, why are people still voting for us?
They're voting, unfortunately, for the BJP on other issues. After the disasters of demonetization, where people suffered terribly, they voted for the government because it became a national security election after Pulwama and Balakot. Tomorrow, the BJP is seeking votes in the name of the Ram Mandir. let's be very realistic. It's not, unfortunately, the BJP has been brilliant at getting voters to stop thinking about their self-interest and instead vote some sort of sense of national pride, Hindu pride, identity pride, and so on. That's nothing. I mean, that argument is the most specious of the arguments possible, because it is not actually answering the economic questions which are hurting people. But coming back to your specific questions, unemployment rates. According to the CMIE, our current unemployment rate is 8.7%, which is higher than any time in the UPA era. But what is worse is the unemployment rate amongst youth aged 20 to 24. That's at a record 45.4% in fiscal year 22-23. We've seen a situation where under the BJP, as recently, if you take all the unemployment overall, instead of 8.1, in October it hit 9.4%. So 8 to 9% seems to have become a kind of new normal. In the last year, 2023, the unemployment rate was averaging throughout between 8 and 9%. And the unfortunate truth is that even where jobs have grown, they've grown in financially precarious areas like construction work and low-end service roles, and agriculture and manufacturing jobs have actually dropped. So you're not really seeing any decent employment. If you look at educated people, for example, educated unemployment has worsened really badly, with rising from 19.2% in the UPA era to 35.8% under the NDA, and postgraduates have gone up to 36.2%. This is not exactly a healthy situation. We've had 135 million workers added to the economy since 2018. During this time, the economy has created just 5 million formal jobs. A formal job is one that pays a regular salary and offers at least one social security benefit.
You know, Jansen, you will recall the opposition continuously targets the government, saying the Prime Minister promised 2 crore jobs a year. The government says, please, at no stage was such a promise made. It is the opposition is not telling the entire truth on it. But the fact is, unemployment has been a big challenge, especially rural unemployment. The same Manrega that you all dissed when you all were in the opposition has now become almost a flagship scheme for the government. So when the Prime Minister speaks, for example, of the latest acronym, speaking of about Garib, about the Annadata, about women, that's Nari, and youth, the truth is unemployment is a big challenge.
So unemployment is a very, very important priority, if not the top priority for our government. And that is very simply because of our demographics, where we have a lot of young people joining the workforce in large numbers. And it's always been a challenge in India to bring women into the workforce. And that is really where we have our most untapped potential. And for that, we need to create formal sector jobs. Now, let's, with that backdrop, look at our performance. Shashiji quoted many numbers. I'll quote the numbers that are considered to be the best quality numbers by most economists, and those are the PLFS numbers that started in 2017. If you look at the PLFS numbers and you look at 2 metrics which are very important, number one, overall employment, that has been improving very significantly. Unemployment has dropped from about 6-7% right now to about 3%. This is from the PLFS data. And number two, labor force participation. Labor force participation in the PLFS data also has gone up quite dramatically. So those numbers look very, very steady. They look excellent. And then, you know, we should also look at EPFO data, which is really the formal sector jobs that Shashiji spoke about. And if you look at the number of formal sector jobs that are being created steadily every year, that also has been very satisfactory, with millions of formal sector jobs being created every year. So overall, all of these are very positive indicators. And then we are not even picking up what has happened through the Swanidhi program, the self-employment programs, self-help groups, Swanidhi for, you know, roadside vendors, etc. There also there's been massive credit that's been pumped into people for self-employment, lots and lots of mudra loans, and all of that has contributed to significant growth in income, both in the fully formal sector as well as in the informal sector. And one of the very big contributions that we have made to our economy has been the formalization of the economy, bringing lots and lots of people into the formal sector. We have about 6 crore MSMEs. 3 crore, that is 50% of them, have registered in the Udayam portal to become formally registered MSMEs, which means that they have access to credit, they can get access to a whole host of government programs, they can get social security, and so on. Similarly, if we look at agriculture, we've got about 11-12 crore farmers now part of the Kisan Samman Nidhi and getting signed up to the Kisan portal. So this formalization enables us to be able to support them and provide them with a host of modern conveniences and
But Mr.
and
Sinha,
credit services.
but Mr. Sinha, if all was so well, why did the government have to announce that we will extend our free food grains scheme for 80 crore Indians? In a sense, there's a recognition that people at the bottom of the pyramid are still hurting. Why not accept that?
Rajdeep, that's not correct. What the program does, the Garib Kalyan Yojana, is a program that's working very well. We have a large amount of surplus food grains. Those surplus food grains are rotting in warehouses. It's very good to be able to provide them to people. In any case, they were only paying 5 rupees per kg. Now they're not paying anything. And we are able to get this surplus food grain out. And in addition to that, if we are able to provide them this support, then they can take their consumption and increase that. They can invest in health, they can invest in education. So this is a good way to provide social security and support to the people who need it the most. And that's how we are going to lift every section of society.
Shashi Tharoor, one of the achievements that the government keeps saying is that, look, we have provided people direct cash transfers, benefits that have gone to the people without any leakages. And that's why we've created this Labharti constituency of beneficiaries. When the Prime Minister, I repeat, uses that word, Gyan, the Garib, the youth, the Annadata and the Nari, he's saying that these are the vulnerable sections, these are the 4 castes in a way that we have targeted. And that's where you've got to see the government's economic achievement. We've kept people, the vulnerable sections, we have ensured that they get the benefits of DBT in particular.
No, wait, Rajdeep, you're going all over the place. Jayant has said a couple of things that cannot go unchallenged. Number one, self-employment is nothing to boast about. The number of unpaid workers in the self-employed category has shot up from about 40 million to 95 million in the last 5 years. And a high level of self-employment merely means that there are no other alternatives for employment. The ILO doesn't even deem them to be employed if they're not paid. It's only India that considers them as self-employed.
No, but do you agree that the government's direct cash transfer schemes have alleviated to a large extent any sense of distress?
No, I'm coming to it one point after the other.
Yes.
Similarly, Jan mentioned the Mudra loans, for example, and the absolute fact is that 83% of the loans sanctioned under the Mudra Yojana involve an average amount of less than half a lakh, less than 50,000 rupees. That's not going to provide you a hell of a lot of long-term growth support or a lot of opportunities for other things. Then you come to the direct transfers that you mentioned. The fact of the matter is, we are seeing a situation in which those transfers are necessary because of other kinds of economic failure. 60% of our conventional micro enterprises, Jayant mentioned MSMEs, those that were engaged in business activities for more than 10 years have perished in the last 5. 60%, can you imagine, of the MSMEs have closed down. So the fact that instead of the 6.25 crore MSMEs registered in 2016, we now have a number of 3.25 is not to the credit of the government. Jayant is talking about it, that's so wonderful, they've registered and so on. They are 3 crore less than they were in 2016 after the NDA had come to power taking over these things. Okay. So, we have to look at the actual facts. Now, you did mention the question of the Jan Dhan Yojana and the money that's being transferred directly. The truth is 20% of the Jan Dhan Yojana accounts are inoperative as of December. That is just 1 month ago. And I'm quoting a government response in the Lok Sabha during the winter session. And nearly half of the inoperative accounts belong to women. So you're talking about Nari Shakti and so on. We've already said that youth unemployment is at record 45% levels. Now you've got women, half the Jan Dhan accounts they have are inoperative. Where are they helping these so-called 4 castes they need to help?
Okay,
I'm sorry.
Can I just come to the last point? Who's done better on reforming the economy? If we look at the economy, particularly as a continuum, and we can go back to 91, but I'm comparing 10 years of UPA and NDA, big reforms under UPA, FDI in retail, FDI in aviation, FDI in insurance and pension, Aadhaar introduced in 2009, value-added tax implemented in 2005. Big reforms under NDA, goods and services tax, insolvency and bankruptcy code, merging banks, direct benefit transfer, FDI via automatic route in most sectors. Reforms yet to take off, national asset monetization pipeline, disinvestment targets not met. Jayant Sinha, in conclusion, if I were to ask you what you believe is the singular biggest achievement when it comes to reform and taking the economy on the right path, what would it be according to you?
GST, IBC, PLI, and of course what we have done with startups. There were 350 registered startups in 2014. Now we have more than 1 lakh. We have about 112 unicorns. This has been an outstanding success for India. It's attracted a huge amount of FDI, private equity, venture capital, and that has really positioned India very well to being a globally competitive economy.
And if I were to ask you the negatives, would you accept, for example, private investment has not picked up, consumption has not picked up? Do you accept that despite all the incentives that you provided, even through the corporate tax scheme, the animal spirits of the economy have not been energized, particularly when it comes to manufacturing? Even the PLI has had mixed results.
I don't accept that, Rajdeep, at all. Let me just tell you that as far as private sector capex is concerned, that has gone up by about 20% in this fiscal year. It's gone up very strongly. If you look at PLI, it's been very successful. We are the world's second largest smartphone manufacturer now. That's largely because of PLI. And PLI, of course, has attracted more than 1 lakh crores worth of investment. And we've so far paid out only about 4,000 crores. So each of these very innovative reforms, each of these very innovative policies have had incredible impact, and I think people are noticing and seeing the benefits that they're getting from all of this.
Shashi Tharoor, in conclusion, therefore, what do you believe has been, to your view, the biggest achievement when you were in power? And what, according to you, has been the biggest failure of this government in the last 10 years? Or what would you acknowledge this government? Will you give them some credit at all?
You gave us a very good list of things done when the UPA was in power, including creating an entire rights-based framework through which people could develop and exercise their economic rights as well in this country. On the government side, I take note of Jayant's list. GST has now turned out to be a success, but the botched and hasty implementation in the first couple of years were disastrous, as we well know. As far as the PLI is concerned, there has been no cost-benefit assessment done by the government, other than in Jayant's 2 sentences to you today. It was launched 3 years ago with 2020 actually, with high expectations, and it aimed to provide a subsidy of 1.9 lakh crores over 6 years. But as of this year, so far, only 3,400 crore in claims have been received and 2,900 crore disbursed.
So what will you give credit for? Will you give this government credit, for example, for creating a public digital infrastructure, which is, is now being seen by the world as an exemplar?
The tech stack, which again, something that was begun under UPA, but has been very well developed, the entire business of the UPI and all of these things have given us a worldwide reputation, no problem. But when Jayant then says FDI has gone up, let me point out that according to the Reserve Bank of India, the fiscal year 2022-23 FDI was 42 billion, which is the same as it was in 2008, 2009, 15 years ago under UPA. Whereas during that time, foreign investment has come down from about 3.6% of GDP to just above 1% of GDP. And there is a comparison in the same period.
Rajdeep, FDI has doubled in our 10 years compared to their 10 years. So you can't cherry pick data in one year.
That's in absolute terms. In absolute terms, it has. But I want to ask both of you, yes, Shashi Tharoor.
Sorry, Rajdeep, it's an important point, because the truth is that the gross FDI into India, the government keeps boasting about FDI because they're pulling the wool over the public's eyes. Gross FDI stood at just 10 billion, which is lower than any time since 2007. And our share in global FDI inflows has been falling. As of January to June 2023, we only got 2.8% of the total FDI being invested around the world. So we shouldn't be boasting about FDI. Our FDI numbers actually are seen globally as showing a poorly performing economy, not a very successful one. There's a lot of stocks pulling up that the NDA government needs to do.
In conclusion, since both of you are Lok Sabha MPs who will presumably go to the polls in a few months from now, the general sense we got, the takeaway from today's budget speech was that this is a government that believes it's almost a dead certainty to win the next elections. It's inevitable. Do you believe, and Dr. Tharoor, you can start first and then I'll get Mr. Sinha for a final word, that 2024 is a done deal, and today's budget speech, in a sense, revealed that sense of self-confidence, no populism, no major freebies being announced, because this government is certain that the real budget will come in July 2024 and Nirmala Sitaram will be back to deliver it.
You call it self-confidence, I call it complacency. The fact is they're hoping to win on completely other issues rather than the economic well-being of the ordinary Indian. We will turn to the Aam Aadmi and ask them, are you better off today than you were 10 years ago because of any actions of this government? I can assure you that the moment people realize that they're not voting for a government to build temples, they're voting for a government to improve their economic well-being, you're going to find a very different result from the one that is so smugly being proclaimed by my good friend Jayant Sinha's party. I don't think you're going to get the result. They're not going to get the result.
Mr. Sinha, your final response, therefore, is the government complacent or is it confident?
Rajdeep, we are very confident and we welcome an election that is fought on economic issues. On every other issue, of course, we will trump any other party very easily. Economic issues also we will trump everyone else because we have delivered outstanding economic performance, and that's not based on our data alone. It's based on what the world is saying and very reputed agencies around the world are saying. And of course, it is manifested right down to the most remote village and to the poorest family in the most remote village.
And you're willing to take up the challenge that Dr. Tharoor has offered. Are Indians better off today than they were 10 years ago, right?
Rajdeep, I deal with it every single day in Hazaribagh, which of course, as you know, is in the state of Jharkhand, and which is a very poor state. And every day I can walk into even the remotest village and answer that question in the affirmative and have people clap because we have actually delivered for them in their economic life and in everything else, of course, also. But because we have delivered economically, they can see कि उनको पक्का घर मिला है, उनको बिजली मिली है, उनको आयुष्मान भारत मिला है, मुफ्त में राशन मिला है, सबको हम लोगों ने टीकाकरण करवाया है. तो when we go forward and we explain that, everybody agrees with us.
I can see Shashi Tharoor trying to get in with a final word. Dr. Tharoor, you have a final word?
Well, the bottom 60% of India's people, according to all figures, have seen negative income growth in the last few years. So I'm not, obviously the elections are going to demonstrate if Jayant is right or not. But given that the poorest 20% of households in our country have seen income levels shrink more than half, 52% from their levels in 2016, I just don't believe that people are going to be saying, wow, we're so much better off. Okay. Every schemes that this government boasts of, even the Ujjwala cylinders, most people can't afford refills. You're in a situation in which you've got a number of token gestures, but the real lives of ordinary people have only suffered, not improved.
Jayant Sinha, Shashi Tharoor, maybe we should make this an annual feature. Every time there's a budget, get the two of you to spar with each other, because it's wonderful to hear two erudite voices speaking to each other and not necessarily at each other and giving us their viewpoints. We leave it to the viewers to judge who performed better when it came to handling the economy, the Manmohan Singh government in 10 years or the Narendra Modi government. Jayant Sinha, Shashi Tharoor, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you. ₹6,000 a month. It's the money that goes through Narega as well. So we have to look at all of these transfers and then do a before and after comparison to see whether the rural economy is doing well. I can only offer my anecdotal observation from Jharkhand, which is one of the poorest states in India, and I can certainly tell you that our rural economy 10 years later is flourishing compared to where it was 10 years before. And this is with a JMM Congress government that is notoriously corrupt and incompetent. So even then, because of all that we have been able to accomplish in the economy, I think
that this is unprecedented. It's never really happened before, where a sitting chief minister has been arrested and he needs to seek legal opinion on how best to tackle the situation. And that is why he needs more time. This is what officially the governor has informed Champai Soren, where he met him this evening, finally after 22 hours at about 5:30 p.m. Now, what are constitutional experts saying in this, Rajdeep, is that this is a constitutional crisis that has been created by the governor in the state of Jharkhand. Primarily the reason why, because as per protocol, when Hemant Soren stepped down and resigned as chief minister, he's in jail right now. Either the governor at that point of time would have made public that Hemant Soren, even though in jail, continues to remain as a caretaker chief minister till the time a new chief minister and a new government is sworn in. He never did that. So now Hemant Soren is in jail. He has stepped down. The governor hasn't called Champai Soren, who clearly has the numbers in terms of that video and the signatures of the 43 signatures that he took to the governor. He hasn't called him into a state claim and form government, and not announced president's rule either. So what the state of Jharkhand is in a state of flux, which is a constitutional crisis, Rajdeep.
The constitutional crisis being sparked off, as you said, first time a sitting chief minister being arrested in this manner by the ED, the governor apparently checking to see what are the procedures to be followed. Apurva, you're there in Hyderabad, where many of the MLAs are reportedly arriving. These include not just JMM, but Congress MLAs. There has been a question whether all the MLAs are intact. What are you gathering? Are all the MLAs together of Jharkhand Mukti Morcha, or could there be some MLAs who've gone missing?
Well, Rajdeep, we do know right now that for over 35 MLAs there who have boarded the plane, and in fact we are getting to know that they're all set to arrive in Hyderabad Begumpet Airport, where I am at shortly. In fact, this is the airport, and as you can see, security has been beefed up out here just as we are awaiting for the flight to take off from Ranchi Airport and arrive here in Begumpet here in Hyderabad. We're also getting to learn that most likely there are 3 places that have the Congress-led government here has narrowed down, where likely in either of these in one of these 3 resorts there's going to be these MLAs who are going to be put up at, and all of these 3 places are at 3 different parts of the city. Interestingly, one is right near this airport, whereas there's another airport there at Shamshabad, where there's yet another resort there where likely bookings are being made. So we're seeing 3 different resorts names that are being given out. In fact, the Congress government here, Revanth Reddy, the chief minister, has said that sources according to us do state that there's been all arrangements that are being made to ensure that all of these MLAs who are arriving here from Ranchi, from Jharkhand, are going to be taken care of well, and that all necessary arrangements have been made. So it's only about to be a couple of hours before we're getting to know if the MLAs are going to reach here and where they are going to be put up at. So all preparations from the Congress government here, that's already underway. We're already seeing that there's been an appointment that had been given.
Okay, so Apurva, they're claiming that all arrangements are being made for these MLAs in Hyderabad. Remember, Hyderabad is Congress ruled, one of 3 Congress ruled states, and there's a JMM Congress government, so they seem to believe they are safe in Hyderabad. So this is resort politics all over again, this time in Jharkhand. I want to go to Mahua Maji. She is the JMM MP of the Rajya Sabha. Mahua Maji, ये बताइए, आपके MLA सब हैदराबाद चले गए हैं. इससे सवाल उठता है, क्या आपको कहीं डर है कि आपके JMM MLAs एकजुट रहेंगे या बीजेपी में जा सकते हैं, जो अन्य राज्यों में हुआ है? अभी तक गवर्नर ने चंपाई सोरेन को बुलाया भी नहीं है. किस तरह से आप देख रही जो हो रहा है अभी? How are you seeing it?
देखिए, सबसे पहली बात कि हमारी पार्टी में पूरी एकजुटता है, गठबंधन की सरकार है. बार बार सभी लोगों ने माननीय मुख्यमंत्री जी के साथ एकजुटता दिखाई है. आपने देखा होगा कि कल जब माननीय मुख्यमंत्री हेमंत सोरेन जी ने इस्तीफा दिया और उस समय तुरंत उनको सभी एमएलएज का साइन किया हुआ, उसमें 43 एमएलए वहां सशरीर उपस्थित थे। वो सभी गए 3 बस में भरकर गवर्नर हाउस, और 5 प्रतिनिधि एमएलए जिनमें से एक माननीय चंपई सोरेन जी थे जो विधायक दल के नेता चुने गए, और उनके साथ 5 अलग अलग पार्टीज के एमएलए भी थे जिन्होंने वहां समर्थन दिया और समर्थन पत्र जमा किया। उन्होंने दावेदारी की अपने सरकार बनाने की। इसके बाद आज 22 घंटे गुजर जाने के बाद जब टाइम भी मिला 5:30 बजे का, उस समय भी वो 5 प्रतिनिधि मंडल ही गए, पांचों मिलकर। उस समय भी सभी एमएलए को वहां जाने के लिए परमिशन नहीं मिला, तो वो लोग वेट कर रहे थे और इस उम्मीद में थे कि अभी सरकार का गठन हो जाएगा, हमारे नए मुख्यमंत्री चुने जाएंगे, क्योंकि हमारा राज्य अभी अनाथ है, यहाँ कोई भी सरकार नहीं है। इसके बावजूद क्यों नहीं आखिर मुख्यमंत्री का शपथ ग्रहण हुआ या नियुक्त किया गया, जबकि बगल के बिहार में कितने मिनटों में या कितने घंटों में आपने देखा ही होगा कि तुरंत वहां पर शपथ ग्रहण समारोह हो गया। तो ऐसा क्यों?
मैडम
एक ही देश में इतना भेदभाव क्यों?
मैम ये सवाल उठता है कि अगर आपके साथ, इफ यू आर कॉन्फिडेंट ऑफ ऑल योर एमएलएस होल्डिंग टुगेदर, व्हाई यू फ्लाइंग देम ऑफ टू हैदराबाद? क्या जरूरत पड़ी है? अगर सब एमएलए चंपाई सोरेन के पीछे है, वेरी फैक्ट यू आर फ्लाइंग देम टू हैदराबाद जहां कांग्रेस का राज्य है, आपको कहीं डर है कि ये एमएलए एक साथ रहेंगे या नहीं? तो फिर ये रिसोर्ट में भेजने की क्या जरूरत है?
मैं आपको बता दूं कि जिस समय गवर्नर हाउस में आज 5:30 बजे वो लोग गए थे ना, उस समय सभी एमएलए की तस्वीर वीडियो जारी की गई थी, वही खड़े होकर, मैं भी वही थी, मेरे सामने ही उनकी रिकॉर्डिंग हुई, वीडियो बनाए गए, सारे एमएलए खड़े थे कि अगर माननीय गवर्नर उन्हें भी बुलाएंगे तो वो भी तुरंत 5 मिनट में वहां पहुंच जाएंगे। और वो वीडियो लेकर वो गवर्नर हाउस में गए, क्योंकि सबको जाने का परमिशन वहां नहीं था। 5 लोग गए, 5 लोगों ने वो वीडियो भी दिखाया और आग्रह किया, अनुरोध किया कि भाई अब शपथ दिलवा दीजिए। लेकिन ये कौन सी ऐसी मजबूरी है कि एक लोकतांत्रिक देश में संविधान के हिसाब से नहीं चला जा रहा है, और बगल के राज्य में जो कि 1-1.5 हफ्ता पहले बिहार में तुरंत शपथ ग्रहण करवा दिया गया था, जब मेजोरिटी है, सभी विधायक कह रहे हैं, वीडियो जारी हो रहा है, उनके द्वार में जाके वो खड़े हैं, उन्हें बाहर फिर से वापस कर दिया जाए।
To the last 10 years, which is why we want to raise the big
in the world right now. It was a fragile fight.
Economy. The Modi government over 2014 to 24 or the Manmohan Singh government? That's the debate we've been having. We'll be joined on that debate by more voices. But before that, a look at the budget 2024-25 highlights. Nirmala Sitharaman's interim budget says there will be no changes in income tax. Outstanding disputed tax demands up to 25,000 rupees have been withdrawn. Government to build 2 crore houses under the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana over the next 5 years. Capex outlay hiked to 11.1% to 11.11 lakh crores now. 2,05,000 crores for Prime Minister Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana. Manrega allocation has been hiked by 43.3% to 86,000 crores. Vaccination of 9 to 14-year-old girls for cervical cancer, and the fiscal deficit for 24-25 has been kept at 5.1%. Now, as we look back at the last 5 years of NDA 2 and the performance of the Modi government on the economy, who better to join us than Professor K.V. Subramaniam. He is someone who was intimately involved in Nirmala Sitharaman's budget making till not too long ago as Chief Economic Advisor to the government. Appreciate your joining us, Professor Subramaniam. Give us what you believe is the biggest takeaway at the end, this final budget of the 10 years of the Narendra Modi government. What for you is the biggest talking point?
Rajdeep, to me, this is a judicious budget. It's a non-populist one, and it's a visionary one. It's judicious on the fiscal part, very aggressive consolidation path laid for the for fiscal consolidation. At the same time, it's non-populist because no big bang populist measures have been announced, and a vote on account, actually the respect of that has been adhered to. At the same time, it's visionary because on three counts primarily. If you take a look at the 1 lakh crore provision that has been made for innovation, 50-year zero-interest loans, I think that will make a big difference in furthering innovation. You would recall in the 2020-21 economic survey, we'd written on various aspects of innovation that India needs to work on. India had broken for the first time into the top 50 among innovative countries, and if India has to be among the top 3 economies in the near future, then I think it has to start belonging in the top 10 in terms of innovation. And I think this provision, a very large provision, I think will go a long way. The capital expenditure spending, an increase of 11.1%, which translates into 1,11,000 crores, which is a large amount, and comes on the back of a 35% increase in the last year. Third part, which is the incentives given to states for capital expenditures. You would recall last year there was a provision of 1.3 lakh crore, of which 98,000 crores has already been utilized by states, and that has led to a 47% increase in capex spending by states. So I think doubling down on that and also providing greater provision for zero interest loans in tourism as well. I think those are very, very visionary steps. Also, I'm waiting for some of the details to come on the solar panels that could have an important impact on the power sector, but at this point in time I think it's hard to react on that particular announcement.
The reason I asked you to give me the bigger picture, not just the interim budget. Look at the bigger picture over the last 10 years. I've done this show comparing 2004 to 2014 and then comparing it 2014 to 2024. I've heard the opposition say, look at growth rate figures between 2004 to 2014 are much better than they've been between 2014 and 2024, for instance, and suggesting that many of the measures that have been announced, for example, including the Lakpati Didi scheme, the fact that self-help groups will transform the lives of millions of women, according to the opposition, this is something which is a continuity of what was happening between 2004 and 14. The likes of Ila Bhatt, Seva were long there in this field, encouraged by government. So is this about continuity the last 10 years for you? What for you is the biggest change compared to 2004 to 14?
Rajdeep, I've been on record saying that the 2004 to 2014 decade was a lost decade. At a time when China was growing at 12%, before the global financial crisis, the entire global economy was growing so well. You know very well that a rising tide lifts all boats. But at the same time, when a tide is actually going down, that's when registering growth becomes very difficult. So in a global economy which is actually struggling to grow at 2.5%, we are now growing at 7% plus. And you would recall, you've done the interviews before, in the amidst the COVID crisis, on the 31st of August of 2020, I had said that we will grow at 7% plus, and that has happened. And that is amidst a very difficult global scenario. So I think it is important to keep that in mind. If we look at the response to the crisis as well, India, had double-digit inflation during after the global financial crisis. The average inflation was about 9.5% in that decade. In contrast, inflation now has been 5.5%. And India had become part of the fragile five. Now, we're actually part of the top 5 economies and aspiring to be part, to grow into top 3 economies. So I think as they say in Hindi, doodh ka doodh, pani ka pani, actually the numbers are very clear. The economic performance has been far better in the last 10 years, especially on inclusive growth. Leave alone the cronyism that actually that 2004 to 2014, some of the crony lending and the real problems on the financial sector that had been built up, all that has been cleaned up. And now if you look at the credit that's growing, non-food credit, net out the personal loans, it's growing at 13%. NPAs are really down. So I think absolutely there's no doubt that the economic performance has been far better than the lost decade of 2004 to 2014.
You're calling it the lost decade. Now, One of the other arguments that has been made by your predecessors from
I've called it
2014 is to look at those at the bottom of the pyramid, suggesting income inequalities have grown. Today, the finance minister said real incomes have risen by 50%. And that has led to some skepticism within the opposition ranks. They seem to suggest that those at the bottom of the pyramid have seen their wages remain almost static and income inequalities have widened. 60% of income goes roughly to about 10% of the population. How do you respond? Is that the big challenge going ahead? Assume that this government wins another election, as many believe it will. Come July, do you believe that's the big challenge? How are you going to actually, revive the so-called animal spirits of the economy, get private investment, get private demand kick-started, and also reduce income inequalities?
So firstly, I don't know what numbers you are looking at and who are you quoting, but if you actually look at credible analysis done by folks like Dr. Arvind Panagaria, he's actually looked at the PLFS data, and he actually shows that during COVID, income inequality has actually declined, not increased. So I think that's a narrative that actually is not backed by data clearly. If you look at the gross national, the per capita income itself, that has grown significantly too. So I think if you look at the employment front, especially youth employment, and the former chief statistician TCA Anant is on record saying that in the 18 to 25 category, the number of jobs created 3.5 crore in the last 5 years, in a segment where population has grown at 1.4 crores. So, all these numbers, I think, clearly puncture any so-called narratives about, the bottom of the pyramid not growing, because it has been one of the singular achievements of this government, especially through the use of JAM Trinity, where they've done, very targeted welfare schemes, and that has really helped in inclusive growth. As for the,
I was quoting, you said, Mr. Subramaniam, sorry, you asked who was I quoting? I was quoting former Finance Minister P. Chidambaram here, whose statement said the government is either callous or ignorant to the fact that the top 10% own 60% of the nation's wealth and earn 57% of the national income, and that income inequality, he contends, has widened significantly. You're saying that's an achievement you believe that there's an achievement in terms of those at the bottom of the pyramid have been looked after. Am I correct?
So, let me respond, Rajdeep. I think Mr. Chidambaram's credibility now is not believed by too many folks. I think, I'm sure you've seen that video where he actually had questioned about the, digital infrastructure, what is happening, and, and look at everything that he says, actually the opposite happens. So I think his credibility is actually, we would rather not talk about it. Let's talk using data. And I think when you look at that, it is very clear that there has been very good growth at the bottom of the pyramid. I quoted data from, Dr. Panagaria's study. I quoted data on employment as well. One important parameter, I think, which many of you actually may not have noticed, if you look at the labor force participation ratio of females, that has increased from about 25% to 41% in the rural areas in particular. That's a 16% increase in a 5-year period, which has happened because of the the LPG, free LPG that's been provided, the Nal Se Jal, which actually earlier, women had to actually travel large distances to fetch a bowl of water, or they had to actually spend a lot of time, and breathe polluted air. Now, actually, they're becoming far more productive, and that is why they're able to contribute, in the labor market as well. These are all signs of actually progress that has happened in a very inclusive manner. So, if you go by the data, I think, a lot of these narratives that, folks like Mr. Chidambaram talk about, that I think don't hold water. Now let me talk about
the data that you said on women's employment is challenged by saying this is unpaid employment. In fact, it is contentious data. But I want to ask you one final question. What, according to you, therefore, going ahead is the biggest?
Let me respond to that.
What, according to you, sir, going ahead is the biggest challenge? Going ahead, where do you believe is the biggest challenge if we are to move towards what the Prime Minister calls is Viksit Bharat?
So let me respond to that, Rajdeep. I took that into account. Actually, even if it is, you look at women, they are contributing to the work that their spouses are doing, or it's part of agricultural work. That has happened because they actually the drudgery in the kitchen has actually reduced and they've become more productive, which is why they're able to contribute. That is something which is productivity improvements that any economist actually worth his or her salt cannot ignore. So I think that is something which is important to make. You cannot dismiss just because it is an increase in unpaid work. That doesn't mean that productivity that's coming from productivity improvements from other steps that have been taken. Now let me come to the challenges that you've talked about. I think I will signal a couple of them. I think it's important to follow up on some of the reforms that had been announced in 2020. I will particularly take the case of labor reforms. The bill has been passed. I think it is important to complete that. The subordinate legislation for that in coordination with states need to be brought in so that the cost of labor really goes down and labor reforms are actually ushered in. At the same time, I would also, mark out some of the, compliances on manufacturing. I think that also needs to be worked on. Some of the power sector reforms, I think, especially smart metering, that needs to be completed at the state level. Our discoms need to be, made healthier, and overall power costs need to be reduced so that manufacturing can increase. And I think a trend which actually is happening at the state level, that is something that we have to make sure that it does not catch too much. There are many states that are just distributing freebies. I have been on record before saying that revenue expenditure does not add too much to the economy. In contrast, capital expenditure does. And this tendency to promise freebies, this guarantee and that guarantee that you've seen in Karnataka and then you're seeing in Telangana now, I think those kind of trends need to actually be reduced. So those are the broad aspects that I would highlight.
There's, of course, Modi ki guarantee, and there are the guarantees that you claim that the opposition state governments are doing. You want to make a quick distinction between the two? Is there a distinction between Modi ki guarantee and what the opposition guarantees? Is Ladli Behna for you, for example, in a state like Madhya Pradesh?
See,
a guarantee which needs to be carried forward or not?
So let me, bring the example of PM Kisan, for instance. There's a very nice piece of research that's been done by Pulak Ghosh at IIM Bangalore and this PhD student from University of Chicago, where they've shown that PM Kisan has actually led to increase in investment. And if you would recall, when PM Kisan was announced, I was the chief economic advisor, and actually I had argued at that time that by reducing some of the left tail risk, it will bring in investment, and that is exactly how it has happened. That's a welfare scheme that has actually delivered on economic value. If you similarly look at the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, or you look at the PM Awas Yojana, and I think that has helped asset creation at the bottom of the pyramid. You would understand very well, you come from a middle class family yourself. A house actually is something that is actually own house is a very important aspect, and so many houses have been created. And I think, if by last count, about 2.5 crore houses have been created at the bottom of the pyramid. These are all aspects that I think the guarantee that is being spoken about here actually is one that shows up, in the poor people's life and really enhances the quality of their life. That is, I think, what, from an economic perspective, really makes a difference to their lives.
Okay. Professor K.V. Subramaniam, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for giving us your perspective on what you believe have been the challenges and the achievements of this government. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Okay, let's get a final word on this Manmohan-nomics versus Modi-nomics debate. Joining me now is someone who's worked closely and seen governments at the center very closely. Dr. Amit Mitra is, dare I say, the grand old or grand young man of finance ministers, former finance minister of West Bengal, still advisor to the chief minister there. Dr. Mitra, we've been comparing over the last hour the Manmohan Singh government's performance on the economy and for 10 years and the Modi governments. I know your party is part of the broader India alliance now, but give me an objective perspective after hearing the report card by Nirmala Sitharaman. Would you concede that the Modi government has kept the economy in a stronger place today in 2024 than when they took it over in 2014?
I must submit that I beg to disagree. you take the fundamentals into consideration. What is the unemployment rate in India today? Now, this is the same debate as Dr. Manmohan Singh's period and Mr. Modi's period. 42 million people are officially unemployed as per government's own data. That's 9.05%. Has that been seen before? 9.05% unemployment?
No, there are various numbers on unemployment. The government cites EPFO data. They say labor participation rate is increasing. They claim the average, you compare the average during the Manmohan Singh years with the Modi years, they claim that unemployment is not as big a problem as some numbers make it out to be.
Yes, from Modi government's point of view, common people's issues are not big issues. The issues lie somewhere else. Let me also ask a second question. Youth unemployment. Okay, you differ with the overall unemployment. Another source of reliable data says that youth unemployment between the age of 20 to 24, which is the main working age, it's 44.49%, over 44% youth unemployment. Now, the budget talks about three things, which includes demography. This is demographic deficit, where you have 44% of your youth unemployed. Then also, of course, let me take you to the same issue. 135 million people were added to the labor force after 2018. How many of them got jobs? You look at Ashoka Modi, a professor at Princeton. He has used the government data and found that only 5 million of the 135 million people have got jobs. Have you seen that under Dr. Manmohan Singh's period or any other period? Today, Rajdeep ji, 450 million people, larger than the population of the United States, are not looking for jobs or are unemployed. 450 million people. Their pain doesn't matter to the Modi government because they have some other agenda. Now, let me go to agriculture. This is an amazing thing that has never happened before under any government in recent times, is reverse migration. Today, 45.5%, more than 45% share of workforce is in agriculture today. Increased reverse migration. Why? Because your manufacturing job growth has only been 0.8%, not even 1%. So they don't have jobs. So they return back home, live in their own home little place that they have, looking for 100 days work. 45.5% reverse migration. Never happened in recent history. Then I come to inflation, which was debated between my two colleagues that I heard. Just take food inflation. Don't go to individual items. Food inflation is 10% today. Now, it is the job of the government, along with Reserve Bank of India, to control inflation.
But
now,
food inflation was double digit when the Manmohan Singh government was in power. The point is we can all cherry pick numbers, look at specific periods. I want you to give me in conclusion the big picture. The big picture seems to be that the Modi government believes that they have put the country in a position of macroeconomic stability and therefore on the path to growth despite the setbacks in the last couple of years or between 2020 and 2022 because of the COVID pandemic. Do you go along with that or do you believe there are holes in this argument?
No, I'll give you just one hole. Capital expenditure has been tom-tommed. That huge capital expenditure, even in this budget, 11 some number.
1%, yes.
Yeah, of lakh crores, etc. Are you aware, Rajdeep ji, that capital expenditure target versus spending of this government? 22-23 last year, little more than 50%, between 50 and 60% was spent. More than 40% was not spent. These numbers don't mean anything. Government of India has an assistance program for capital investment. Do you know that only 34.7% of that was released? Only 34.7. Let me come to the other very important point. The budget talks about diversity, democracy, and demography. 3 Ds. They should have called it perhaps DQ. They don't know that. Demography, I've explained to you, is a demographic deficit, not a dividend. Democracy is moving towards electoral autocracy. And diversity, you know, I know, under serious threat. So the 3 Ds that the budget talks about, none of the 3 Ds, in fact, have any validity.
Okay, but can I ask you in conclusion, since we are talking of acronyms, the government has also given Gyan, this word that has been used constantly, Garib, youth, Annadata and Nari, and saying that's the focus, the vulnerable areas, and they're winning elections. You see, because they are winning elections, I asked this also to Dr. Tharoor, but because they are winning elections, they get a sense that, look, we are on the right track. If there was so much anger, if there was so much rural distress or unemployment, why aren't they voting the government out? A final word.
Well, I think you're right that you may not be aware that food subsidy has been cut. They don't care. Fertilizer by 13%. Most interesting, urban rejuvenation and smart city, that they talk about smart city all the time. Budget has been cut by 21.2%. And assistance to states on movement of food grains, that has been cut by 17.1%. So the key point that I'm making is they don't care, given these kind of cuts, because they don't think they win elections by development. They win elections by majoritarian consolidation of votes.
So therefore, are you going to tell me that you give no credit at all? What is that? Is there one positive feature at the end of 10 years of the Modinomics report card that you would like to concede or highlight?
I think in the Modi government's effort to implement things is there, but what is interesting is they have stopped data collection. So how do I support them when I can't find the surveys that they usually used to do all throughout Indian history post-independence? So my problem is that they don't have the data because they have stopped collecting it. This is a part of the democracy undermined, in my view.
Okay.
Therefore, I would conclude that instead of comparing with X or Y, X's regime or this regime, let's look at objectively, which I've placed before you, the pain of the common people. Cut. In fact, in the last budget, if you recall, they even cut Narega, 100 days work. Now, why would they cut that? Because then they lose elections. But key point to me, it appears, is that's not what they win elections by. They have understood that formula. Formula is divisiveness, majoritarian, consolidation of the vote. That gives them much, much bigger bang than these developmental issues. That's a sad part of Indian history that we have never seen before.
Okay, let me leave it there, Dr. Mitra. As I said, what we've made an effort is to get a variety and diversity, using that D word, diversity of voices. It is my firm belief that unless you have diversity of opinion, democracy gets undermined. Thank you all very much, including Dr. Mitra, for joining me on this special show.
You are watching India Today.
How many seats will the BJP get if general elections are held today?
Who would you rate as India's best chief minister?
Do you support the idea of one nation, one poll?
Will the consecration of the Ram temple help the BJP in the Lok Sabha elections?
After Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who do you think is best suited to be India's Prime Minister?
All this and more in the next edition of the India Today Mood of the Nation opinion poll, exclusively on India Today TV.
अभी किस जेल में लेकर जाया गया है?
बिरसा मुंडा केंद्रीय कारावास होटवार।
वहाँ पर आज पूरी रात वहीं पर?
जी, आज पूरी रात रहेंगे और रिमांड पे सुनवाई कल होगी।
जब एक मुख्यमंत्री को जेल भेजा जाता है, किस तरह की व्यवस्था वहाँ पर होती है?
सुरक्षा के दृष्टिकोण से भी देखा जाता है और बाकी बहुत सारे एस्पेक्ट होते हैं, क्योंकि यहाँ पे MP MLA कोर्ट है, यहाँ पे इन्हें स्पेशल प्रोविजंस और स्पेशल इनके लिए अरेंजमेंट्स की जाती है। तो आज रिमांड पे सुनवाई, जो 10 दिन की रिमांड ED ने मांग की थी, उसको कोर्ट ने आज उसके लिए नामंजूर कर दिया और कल फिर रिमांड पे सुनवाई कल दोबारा होगी।
कल दोबारा से इसी तरह की चर्चा, इसी तरह की बहस आज जैसा देखने को मिला है?
बिल्कुल कल फिर से होगी रिमांड।
कितने घंटे की हो सकती है इस बारे में?
इसमें अब ED की तरफ से जो दलीलें दी जाएंगी, उनका काउंटर जो हमारे AG साहब है उन्होंने आज करा है, उनकी तरफ से भी अपनी दलीलें रखी जाएंगी, उसके बाद ही किसी निष्कर्ष पे पहुंचेंगे।
कितने बजे यहाँ पर आएंगे, इस बारे में कोई जानकारी?
इसके बारे में अभी तक कोई जानकारी नहीं मिल पाई है।
अंदर अब हेमंत सोरेन के वकीलों की ओर से क्या कुछ कहा गया? जब ये आर्ग्यूमेंट दोनों तरफ से चल रहा था, तो किस पक्ष की ओर से क्या दलीलें?
हेमंत सोरेन की ओर से जो अराउंड 8 एकड़ के लैंड इन क्वेश्चन पे अभी जो चल रहा है डिस्प्यूट, उस पे उनके तरफ से कहा गया ये लैंड भूमियरी नेचर का है और ये लैंड जो है वो किसी राम को बिलोंग करता है और LRDC और SAR कोर्ट में इसको लेकर पिटिशन डाला हुआ है और वहां से जो कंसिक्वेंट ऑर्डर है वो भी आ चुका है। तो हेमंत सोरेन हैज नो से इन दिस प्रॉपर्टी, उनका इस प्रॉपर्टी में कोई भी से नहीं है। ED उन्हें झूठ का फंसा रही है।
अच्छा, उनके वकीलों की ओर से इस तरह की दलीलें। एक बार फिर से मैं चाहूंगी, जिस जेल में आज रात गुजारेंगे हेमंत सोरेन, जरा उसके बारे में और ज्यादा जानकारी दीजिए। किस तरह के कैदी वहां पर रखे जाते हैं, कितनी स्ट्रेंथ है, कहां पर, यहाँ से कितनी दूरी पर है, उसके बारे में?
यहाँ से लगभग 12 से 15 किलोमीटर की दूरी पे होटवार में स्थित है। वहाँ पे स्पेशल वार्ड पे ये रखे जाएंगे, क्योंकि ये मुख्यमंत्री रह चुके हैं, तो इनके लिए स्पेशल वार्ड एक वहाँ पे स्पेशल सेल होगा जहाँ पे ये रखे जाएंगे।
क्या परिवार के लोग जाके मुलाकात कर सकते हैं? कल ED दफ्तर में हमने देखा था पत्नी ने जाकर मुलाकात की थी, तो क्या वहाँ पर फैमिली मिल सकती है?
आज तो ये मुश्किल ही है, आज तो पॉसिबल नहीं है, क्योंकि आज वो जाएंगे, आज वहाँ पे रहेंगे। कल प्रोबेबली हो सकता है कि सुबह 8 बजे के बाद किसी को मिलने दिया जाए।
खाना वाना के लिए क्या घर से आया खाना दिया जा सकता है या फिर जेल का ही खाना खाना पड़ेगा?
इसके लिए कोर्ट से स्पेशल ऑर्डर लेना होगा, उसके बाद ही खाना प्रोवाइड किया जा सकता है। अगर कोर्ट अलाउ करती है तभी आपको घर से खाना ले जाना अलाउड।
भारत की इकॉनमी की साइज जितनी इस समय है, इसमें पूरी तरह से मैं आश्वस्त हूं। इस इंटरिम बजट के कारण ही जो भी इंडिकेशन इस बजट से मिले हैं कि हमारी इकॉनमी जो आज दुनिया की टाइप 5 कंट्रीज में है, उसकी साइज बढ़कर 2027 तक मोर देन $5 ट्रिलियन जाएगी और 2030 आते आते मोर देन $7 ट्रिलियन तक पहुंचेगी।
2047 का जो एक रोड मैप दिया है प्रधानमंत्री,
क्या उस रोड मैप, उस टारगेट को हम अचीव करेंगे। हम लोग पूरी तरह से कॉन्फिडेंट हैं।
ऐतिहासिक बजट है जो पूर्ण रूप से परिलक्षित करता है कि प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी जी के नेतृत्व में जो भारत में एक नई क्रांति और परिवर्तन पिछले एक दशक में आई है, एक विकसित भारत का लक्ष्य, एक आत्मनिर्भर भारत का लक्ष्य, एक विश्व गुरु बनने का लक्ष्य, उन तीनों लक्ष्यों के प्रति पूर्ण श्रद्धा के साथ और गति के साथ भारत बढ़ चुका है।
are watching India Today.
The capital cities of virtually every Western European country are paralyzed today, viewer, because farmers in all of these countries have gotten into their tractors and in their hundreds gone to the center of town. The main images coming in today are from Paris, from Rome and from Brussels, the capital of the European Union, where the European Union Parliament is, where the European Union summit will be taking place tomorrow. Very, very dramatic images. Thousands of tractors are on the streets, at least 1,000 tractors, according to a local estimate in Brussels, are on the streets. They've gherowed the entire EU Parliament a day before the EU summit because angry farmers have decided to lodge and register their protest over the huge pressures of compliance owing to regulations on climate change, the price of their produce, nosediving, not being able to get the correct price for what they've been growing, food inflation pressures, and other government regulations that they say are inimical to farmer welfare. So farmers have all united in all of these European capitals. The big image, of course, today, including fire, arson, vandalism, stone pelting, and 1,000 tractors on the road are coming in from Brussels just one day before the big EU summit that will be held at the EU Parliament, which is situated in Brussels. Now, when we mention farmer protests, you of course remember the farmer protests that took place here in India just a few years ago. Farmers versus the European Union has intensified. In Brussels, the farmers have lit fires outside the European Parliament building as a part of the ongoing protests over excessive costs, rules, and bureaucracy. But few have forgotten the protests that took place in India over progressive reforms that were being imposed on farmers. Finally, the government had to embarrassingly roll back the first progressive agricultural reforms in decades. But let's focus today not on India, but on Europe. The European Union viewer had lectured India. Many of these countries had given India condescending gyan a few years ago when the Punjab farmers had collected around the Ghazipur border and the Singhu border near Delhi to put pressure on the government. They had lectured India about farmer welfare. And today, that very same crisis is at their doors, except that it is not progressive policy, it is not progressive rules and regulations, but a whole gamut of other decisions being taken by the European Union that have come now to bite them back. The farmers are blocking traffic across Belgium, France and Italy this Wednesday as they sought to, Wednesday and Thursday, as they're seeking to disrupt trade at major ports and other economic lifelines. Not just that, they were seen spraying milk on buildings or filling streets with cattle. 1,000 tractors are on the roads. Dutch farmers from the Netherlands are dumping manure on the streets and protesting outside politicians' houses. They've gotten into their tractors. They're lining up on highways and making it between state borders to register their protest in the most high-profile capitals. The agitation saw its beginnings last year in France when farmers started blocking roads across the country. France is Europe's largest agrarian producer. The farmers have been demanding government action to address numerous grievances, including not being paid enough, being choked by excessive regulation on environmental protection, and a huge litany of bureaucratic red tape that has stopped farmers from being able to expand and better their livelihoods. So let's just explain and clarify once again, because these visuals, viewer, I know are extremely compelling, and I want to continue to show you the most compelling pictures, the moving pictures of those tractors. I'm going to ask our producer to play the most dramatic images only so we can depict what really is happening outside the European Parliament, including the fire, the stone pelting, and those images of the tractors moving down the highway in large numbers. I want our viewers to see only those most compelling visuals, not the other static images. Now, why are European farmers protesting? Let me just summarize for you what the deal here is. Farmers claim in Europe that they aren't being paid enough, which is an amazing irony, given how the European Union and many of these countries had condescendingly lectured India about farmer welfare just a couple of years ago during the protests here. The farmers in Europe claim they're being choked by excessive environment regulations, competition from cheaper exports from other countries, high costs for energy, fertilizer and transport, the plan to phase out tax breaks on diesel and fuel. All of these have resulted in historic anger among European farmers, and that's the reason why they've united in their tractors, in their thousands, and decided to put a chokehold on Europe's biggest lifelines. They completely surrounded the European Parliament as well, which we'll be showing you in just a moment. Now, Europe's farmer uprising is happening in the following countries, viewer. We've shown you what's happening in Belgium, but it actually started in France, which is Europe's biggest agrarian producer by far. France, Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, Spain, Portugal, Romania, and Hungary. So largely confined to Western and Central Europe, but also a couple of countries in Eastern Europe, including Romania and Hungary, are also involved in this farmer action. So it's a united uprising by farmers looking to influence policy and put pressure on policymakers in order to roll back some of those rules and regulations. They say they are being choked. I want to bring in India Today's Nabila Jamal for more on this story. Nabila, very dramatic images that one doesn't usually see in European capitals. These are countries where law and order and discipline, especially in VIP areas, is a non-negotiable thing. But especially in Brussels tonight, but also Paris, thousands of tractors, pretty much paralyzing these very important areas to put pressure. Explain to us what's going on right now.
Unbelievable visuals coming in from European Union, Shiv. We see farmers there have literally brought the EU to its knees because the kind of protests that they've launched, and this is not in the last 24 hours, this has been on for the last 1 year. And at least in the last few weeks, we know that the farmers have escalated their protests. As we see, they've been spraying manure at buildings. They've literally out the parliament in EU. They've managed to actually break tarred roads, literally break away tarred roads through their tractors. Enough and more dirt that's being sprayed on reputed buildings across several areas of France, Italy, Germany. The protests have moved on to different countries of EU. And we also know the protests actually took on a different turn when a mother and daughter walked into the famed Louvre Museum in Paris and actually poured soup on the Mona Lisa's painting. Thankfully, it had a glass covering on it. But that's what happened. And that's where this entire news has grabbed headlines. The farmers, of course, are protesting against the low prices, the low wages that they get. And also, surprisingly, we see that a lot of the imports, be it tomatoes, cauliflower, cabbage, etc., that's coming in from different countries into countries like France and Italy, etc., are being thrown on the streets by the same farmers. So they're asking for better prices for imports and exports. And it appears that the EU has finally heard. Today, we believe there's a massive summit in EU, and right there is the protest that's happening. And they've already decided, especially France has decided, that they're going to come up with some measures to ensure the farmers are paid better and export and imports, the prices that go to farmers particularly, are reworked. So there is a word on concession for these farmers, but how soon will that happen? That remains to be seen. But this has really hampered business in many of the EU countries, as you listed out.
Okay, stay with me, Nabila. I also want to get a perspective from France. We are joined now from Paris by Nicolas Barr. He's a senior journalist in France, and he's also watching this story unfold. Nicolas, thank you for your time and for being with us here on India Today. We've been looking at this story closely, these dramatic images of hundreds of tractors, perhaps even thousands of tractors, on the road in Brussels and other cities, including possibly Paris. We do know that this farmer agitation began in France last year. It has carried on and escalated quite a bit ahead of the EU summit. How are you looking at this unfold, Nicolas?
Well, at this precise moment, the French Prime Minister is starting a press conference where he is expected to announce some measures in favor of those farmers. What is interesting is, as your reporters have said, is that this movement of protest is all over Europe. You had big protests in Germany, in Spain, and now in France, and they have many things in common. They protest a lot about what they think is an excess of norms, of regulations, in particular on environment, and but also there's another dimension, which is that they consider that they are unable to sell their product at a fair price to the industry, and it's particularly strong in this country, in France, where the farmers have been. The milk producers or meat or whatever, they're all saying that it's very difficult. They're not in a good position to negotiate with big industry and to sell their products at a fair price.
Yes.
And Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Nicholas, do you think that the measures that are likely to be announced by the French leadership could defuse this situation?
Yes, it's possible, because just a few minutes ago, the head of the largest farmers' union has said that they were confident that they had assurance from the government that they would have good measures, and so that they have been heard. So we have the feeling that the government is giving up something, is in particular on regulation. They're ready to move forwards,
Yes.
and so there are many signs that the crisis could ease at least, but at the same time you have some farmers, which are probably a minority, but are very, very determined to continue.
Yes.
And so that's